And we decided we'd start out with talking about the working group meeting, the plenary session coming up, because that's the first time for us to try to do one of these. And has its own growing pains like other things. So we'll start with that. Austin will do a long TSC report. I will do a very short CTO report. Grahame will say a few words about where we are with FHIR release planning post R4. Melva has a number of things with her continual march through our processes, trying to make them much more usable. And so she'll talk about several different things, a new document storage tool, the mechanism that we've put in place, as well as the PSS Workflow and a few others. Ted will finish up with the UTG. This won't be UTG training. This will be a little bit about trying to get to the essence of what is the most important stuff you need to know about UTG. And then if there's any time left, we'll do some Q&A and closing remarks. Austin and I will stay on after the hour if we have other questions. I know a lot of you will have to run off to other things, but we'll hang around for a few minutes extra if anything's going on. So that's our lineup for today. Let's move ahead to the next slide, which is the working group meeting plans. And I sent out an email a month or so ago trying to describe, Mel, next slide, please. Try to describe the philosophy behind what we're trying to do this time. And we're learning as we go along. We got to, we actually canceled the May working group meeting, although we sort of allowed people or just encouraged the use of that time. We did have a Connect-a-thon in May. We took a lot of the experience we gained from the Dev Days meeting in June and tried to figure out the best way to be able to handle a virtual working group meeting. It's always a challenge. I know there's been some confusion and complications about it. But these are the basics of what's in place. The Connect-a-thon will pretty much follow the same pattern that they did in May. Sandy and David and others have come up with some improvements to the framework for how it's being held. So we hope that'll work. But and most importantly, having more control or better visibility into the agenda items. It's something we're working on. That's proved to be very important at the Dev Days meeting as well. Make it easy to jump from one session to another. The plenary meetings, there will be two sessions. We scheduled one in the morning, so for the European-focused audience, and one in the afternoon later on, so that everyone has a chance to sort of attend one. Everyone except those in the dark zone of India and Central Asia, which is still a challenge for us. But we split them into those two sessions, and so we are asking people to try to attend the plenary sessions and not schedule work group meetings during that time, just as we would if we were in a physical hotel conference area. The other key points was we sort of imagined 10 to 6 EDT being the most common time for most of the work groups to meet. We did a poll last April or May, and the feedback from that showed that about 80% of the people likely to attend really are coming from the North American hemisphere. And so we recognize that others are there. And so we did suggest the possibility that people can schedule at least some sessions at other times that might work for the majority of their attendees in the work group. But we felt the 10 to 6 timeframe, virtual meetings are kind of demanding in other ways than face-to-face meetings. And so we thought maybe 3 sessions during that 10 to 6 period would make sense most of the time. And we ask you to consider a 30-minute break. People do need to get up, go out, do their things, get something to drink, or just change their attention span for a few minutes to stay fresh. But we haven't put no restrictions in place. But the idea was about 3 sessions a day, 3 90-minute sessions a day are what people should target for their work groups meeting times. And again, you certainly can do whatever else you want to that works for your team. Not restricting, but just sort of encouraging to not be too burdensome on everyone. And the joint meetings, okay, we didn't do a real good job of explaining what we were trying to do there. When we're in a physical space with joint meetings, the room size has a limit to how many people can be attended. So typically it was done by inviting the relevant 1 or 2 or more relevant work groups that we knew would fit in the space. In a virtual meeting, we don't really have that limitation. And we also know that people who may not be in one of those typically invited work groups may have valid input and interest in the topics that are being set up. So we thought that we really wanted to communicate what's going to be discussed in the joint meeting and allow anyone to attend. That didn't quite work out as smoothly as we thought. I think we probably could have done a better job of communicating and putting that out there, but that was the rationale behind it. So we'll work on that. But I think we all have to. This will be an interesting working group meeting. We'll have to learn and hopefully we'll get our act together because I suspect it won't be the last time we do that. Marianne, Marianne to join us. You can see her smiling face over there outside right now. She knows it's happy hour right after this. So she's in a good mood. You can unmute if you have some questions for Marianne, because I know several of you have had some challenges or have been wondering about this. So over to you, Marianne. If you have any questions, just unmute, speak up, or put in the chat if you're a little shy about speaking. Thoughts?
Does anybody have any questions for me? I just want to say hi. It's so cool to see all these names on here. I'm like, I miss you guys. Hi.
You can put your cameras on if you want to wave or something like we are.
So this is Russ.
Hi, Marianne. Miss you.
Miss you. Hi, Hugh. Aw. Just go ahead, Russ. Sorry. We're just saying hi now.
So I guess one of the things we've been kind of struggling with is there are actually 4 2-hour blocks between 10 and 6. So it was not obvious to those in the work groups I was working on planning with that we were supposed to be using 3 of those, or which 3. I mean, our tendency was to try to map the 2-hour blocks to quarters when we usually have things, so we had some framework to work from, especially for joint meetings.
Sure.
Yeah, that was clear. Yeah, I guess we assumed that there would be a longer break somewhere in the middle there, but we clearly didn't specify that out. So
yeah,
good point. And again, you're not limited if you wanted to meet 4, but we were trying not to extend the burden on people, just because that many of us who've been on these long virtual meetings, boy, they are challenging. They're all day long.
I absolutely understand. We were just, the natural tendency was to try to map to something familiar, which was the 4-quarter schedule of the face-to-face meetings.
Sure.
Yeah.
So future reference and the realistic possibility that the next working group meeting will be virtual as well.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it won't be a plenary session either, so we'll think about that, whether we should make it 3 contiguous sessions or have a longer recommended break in the middle somewhere. We'll think about that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Kevin Bauer. I do have a question because it actually similar to that one. I had noticed that the standard attendance tracking log that you get when you build the agenda in Confluence still shows the quarters. So I was kind of wondering what we should do there as well.
Marianne, did you see what DJ did? I think he sent a note out that he had made some adjustments to that.
I haven't seen it yet because I know that he was working on that today even.
Yeah, he was on his way out the door for taking a day off tomorrow, but he has put together a revised version of that.
Oh, okay.
So we'll send out a note next week that should make it a little clearer to understand. But you're absolutely right. We had a number of tooling limitations that were sort of hard-coded in certain ways around our standard face-to-face meeting, and that was one of the things we had, which was challenging for us. So, just the whole scheduling thing was quite an adventure, right, Marianne?
Yeah.
But I understand you will be publishing an agenda, right?
Yes. Yep. So everything will
make it easy. Yeah.
Yeah, everything will be online. If anybody attended Dev Days or any of a couple of different meetings, but there's an app that we're using. It's kind of like the app that we used when we were at the working group meetings, but it's a little bit better in the sense where everything will be listed out, and then you can just kind of click on the work group sessions and it'll take you to that Zoom meeting that you're in. So it instantly attaches you, and it'll make it really easy for the participants to navigate better. And then within that link, you can put all of your agenda information, you can link to your co-chair page, you can link to your Confluence pages, and that'll help the attendees even more so to search different things. Like if they're interested in looking at different papers or different things, you can actually link all of that in there and people can find you a lot easier.
Yeah, one other bonus we get with the doing it virtually is we can record sessions for people who can't make it in those times or in other time zones. I think we were still trying to figure out where to save all of those and make them. But I think we still may have to figure out the details on that if you want to do that. But that's particularly useful again for those in the dead zones that where really none of the times we have are convenient, where at least they have a chance to be able to pay attention, and that's one small benefit of a working group meeting.
During dev days, there was a bit of a disconnect sometimes between the app on your phone and the app on the website, or the website. Has that been?
Yep, they keep updating it actually daily, just because that's the kind of the way that everybody is going. So the big disconnect, I think, was when you were asking questions within the session. The Q&A was like kind of delayed within the phone app versus the desktop. That has actually been improved already, so that's a good thing. But there still are some things that are only available on your phone versus the desktop, and that's kind of like some of the fun like community things, like if you just want to say hi to people and things like that. But other than that, everything else has been moved over to the desktop.
Yeah, so I think we're going to move on at this point. You can continue to ask questions.
We've got one question in the chat.
I was going to respond to that one verbally to Virginia.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I think I kind of already did, but
Okay,
not the recording.
Good.
But
Yeah. We'll figure. Okay, good. So let's go on. And again, you know how to find Marianne if you have your questions. We'll be providing more guidelines and details as we move along. And so thanks to all of you for trying to for working with what we have to try to get this scheduling. And we are going to get better at it, but it's important that we get this right so that we can try to make the best of the experience. Let's move on to the next slide, Mel, and let Austin take over.
Okay, I'm going to give the TSC report here. Let's go on to the next slide. I'm going to be covering some updates to the workgroup health metrics, celebrate the project proposal process being live, delve a little bit more into current status of standards, and go in a bit about expiring standards. So let's keep going here. We've noticed that some of the existing workgroup health metrics actually talk about the previous working group meeting. We're not going to measure you against those because we didn't have a previous one officially. So, but there are three we're going to keep. So let's go on to the next slide. The ones that we're going to measure you this cycle, for the September 2020 cycle, is that you schedule a meeting at the next working group meeting. It happens to be virtual this time, but we're still going to check that you did schedule a meeting and that you got it in on time, got that request in on time. Of course, we're using a different system for that, but we're still going to measure you against having done that on time. Just like we have in the past. And we're going to check and make sure you've got an agenda posted for that working group meeting. So those are the three related to workgroup health for working group meetings that we're going to continue assessing you against. But obviously we can't assess you against a meeting that never happened. So that's why the other ones are being dropped. Let's go on to the next slide. We're also looking at a series of future changes to workgroup health related to all the various things that are in flux today, including the fact that many of our meetings are going virtual, at least for the time being. So we're looking at updates to account for workgroup participation in the UTG process instead of the harmonization process. I think right now we've just suspended that one. We're going to be looking at what we can do to encourage work groups participating more directly in UTG. As I said, we're looking at adjustments to workgroup health to handle virtual meetings. We may start measuring workgroup participation in these webinars. And we are getting a lot of participation, but we want to make sure that you all get credit for participating in these things. We're looking at metrics around participation in the new project proposal process and the upcoming JIRA workflow-based PSS process. These are going to be, particularly the upcoming PSS workflow-based PSS process. That's going to be instead of participating in steering division votes, etc. So it's going to be important that work groups participate in these Confluence and Jira-based processes, and we're going to start measuring against those instead of participating in the older e-vote processes or face-to-face voting processes that happened in steering divisions. We may be putting in metrics about co-chairs getting training or retraining requirements for both new and existing co-chairs in the future. Let's go on to the next slide. We're going to be putting in place potentially metrics for maintaining the status of standards. This includes the classifying standards as to whether they're active, stable, and retired, and maintaining those appropriately over time as standards move through their life cycle. Also metrics around maintenance of STUs, including getting STU extensions on in time and making sure that eventually those STUs move on to becoming normative standards in the long run. We're also looking at potentially adding metrics for managing JIRA trackers for published standards. That's a new process that we're right in the middle of getting ready to roll out, which is standing up JIRA trackers for all our published standards, not just for STUs. I know there's been one in place for a long time for FHIR, but now we're going to be getting them in place for all our products. And so we're in the process of getting those rolled out, and work groups are going to start having to pay attention to comments that are submitted against the products they're responsible for. And we're going to start looking at metrics for those. And we're going to probably be putting in metrics around the appeals, measuring the number of appeals that a work group has to put in for missing deadlines. So those are all potential changes to workgroup health that may be coming along in the next while. I can't say exactly when when the new ones will be coming out. That will be tied to when these various initiatives start getting rolled out. Let's go on and move on to the next slide. Okay, I want to encourage everybody to, all the co-chairs and actually anybody at HL7 to review the materials I've got listed here. Read and understand them. The co-chair handbook, we've got it out there on Confluence now. HL7 decision-making practices, or the default decision-making practices document that all work groups should be operating under. Your work group's mission and charter, you ought to understand that. In fact, your work groups ought to be looking at that and reviewing it on a regular basis. The HL7 Governance and Operations Manual, get out there and take a look at it. It does actually change 3 times a year, and it's worth trying to stay up on what the latest version looks like. HL7 Essentials, you want to look at the Accelerator homepage, which has an awful lot of great information and links to things that is applicable not just to accelerators, but to everybody who wants to find information. In the future, we may be asking co-chairs to sign off that they've looked at these things and understand their responsibilities. That's probably going to be rolled out with the at the beginning of the year when we bring in the new cadre of co-chairs that we just had an election for last month. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So I want to celebrate the fact that we've got a project proposal process that is live based on a JIRA and Confluence workflow. It's currently optional, but later this year, we're going to be making it mandatory. It's intended for entirely new Release 1 projects of standards. It's not intended for new releases of existing standards. So if you're putting in, starting a project for CDA Release 3, you don't need to put in a proposal for that, for instance. But one of the key things about project proposals is you are trying to identify which work group should be sponsoring the project. Sometimes you know that, but often when you don't know that and you end up having to shop the project around to dozens of work groups to find a home. The current, the proposal process is intended to find that home. But for this to work, you all as co-chairs and your work groups need to start participating in that online process. So it's critical for you all to start paying attention to these things and reviewing them in your work groups when one of these proposals comes in to see if your work group is interested in it or ought to be sponsoring it. We've gotten some mixed feedback on the proposal process, but most work groups who have actually participated in it and used it for proposals think it's valuable. Based upon the feedback that we've gotten, I think we're right in the right place we need to be with this process. And Melva's going to provide some more detailed information in her presentation about this, along with the JIRA-based workflow PSS process. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, current status of standards. I've been talking about this for several of these webinars. We've got 3 statuses that we're assigning to standards. Active standards that have been published and is known or planned to be in use and is planned to have future maintenance releases. A stable standard is one that may be in use and is generating some feedback and questions, but is not under active review or expected to be updated in the foreseeable future. Retired standards it has a standard that has no current or planned standards development activity within the community, which may no longer be in use or which should not be considered for use. Let's go on to the next slide. We did conduct a small pilot over the summer. I wanted to thank the V2 Manager Group for piloting that. Can we go back? There we go. For piloting that process. We're reviewing the results of that and making some adjustments to the rules and process before rolling it out to all work groups later this year. But that will be coming out to the rest of you soon. Okay, now we can go on to the next slide. Just a reminder for everybody to, particularly during the upcoming working group meeting, review your expiring standards, the normative answers standards that are approaching expiration and the STUs that are expiring in the next 6 months, and take the appropriate actions based upon what you see in these 2 locations around expiring standards. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, and we got some approaching deadlines. Dave Hamill sent out an email recently with most of this information. The final deadline for PSS's TSC final approval of PSS's for the January 2020 ballot is August 23rd. That's 10 days away. If you believe you have a project that you're intending to ballot in January and you haven't started that project, I'm just going to say right now, you're too late. It's too late if you haven't even started the project yet. This deadline is for those that are already working their way through the approval process. And that needs to be completed by the 23rd of this month. And the next big deadline are the NIBs, which will be on November 1st for the January 2020 ballot. And you can find all the relevant dates and deadlines in the HL7 calendars out on Confluence. You can see the link there. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay, we're going to try and do an impromptu survey here. So this is where we're going to launch that poll. We're going to see how this works. So are you planning on registering for the September working group meeting and or Connect-a-thon? Yeah, well, the overwhelming majority of people appears to be, the answer to that is yes. Okay, well, I'd be interested in finding out why people aren't planning on going, but you You can let us know that if you want to in chat or offline. Let's go on to the next one. Okay. Oh, well, there we go. No, we want to go on to the next question. So let's see. How do we do this? Okay, we'll share the results, and how do we go on to the next poll? Relaunch polling. Oh, here we go. Okay. Oh no, we're re-asking the same question.
You have
How do we move on
to
to
answer again.
two? Oh, I see how we're doing it. I see how this works. Okay, launch poll. Okay, here we go. Is your work group scheduled to meet during the upcoming working group meeting? Okay. Hey, that's great. 100%. We're running 100% on that one. That one's good. So let's end that one and go to the next one. Launch poll.
Of course, the no's probably aren't on today's call.
Yeah. So did your work group schedule any meeting outside of the normal North American business hours? So this would, be like at midnight Eastern. Okay. Well, that's actually, I'm glad to see that we do have some. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for participating in those polls. Okay. Let's go on to the next slide. That may be the end of mine, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. There we go. There. Wayne, take over.
Back to me. Thanks to all of you for polling. And as I said, I'm going to keep mine a little short this time. Focusing on actually the same things I usually talk about: agility, simplification, tooling, and essentialism. It's important to note that the focus on agility and simplification is once again become a very prime board topic of discussion, and we are actually hoping not to, for one chatter in particular, not to really burden the work groups with additional administrative overhead, but quite do the opposite. When we talk about extra metrics, we hope that expect most of these to be automatically generated so we can see how we're doing and making sure we're doing a good job of compliance, but trying to reduce the burden on the co-chairs and the volunteers. And that's kind of the underlying factor. We want to sort of like filter out the noise from the most critical information, have better, easier ways to get it, and not expect people to have to look at multiple places to find something else, sort of like direct our attention to one place. So that's where we're trying to get with all of these things. It's taken us a long while to get the chunks in place. And, but I think I feel very close we're getting close to turning the corner on this. And so we expect to see a lot of things happen in the next few months. And a lot of this is due to the fact, just because of the pandemic, that we've had to do a better job of doing this because we don't have as much opportunity to meet the same opportunities to meet face to face. But also that I think that the work we've been trying to move over the last few years is finally coming together. So in terms of tooling, there's been Grahame, with some assistance from others, has been working very heavily on re-engineering the IG publisher. And so code base has been renewed, the validator has been enhanced dramatically, and it's now supporting UTG, and it's been supporting a project initiative to move CCDA to a web-based specification published through the publisher. So as we put more and more stuff in it, we're finding dependencies, and it gets complicated, but the idea is we all want to get to, as much as we can, get onto a common publication platform built around the IG publisher. And so look for lots of new things coming, but it's an ongoing project and continuous improvement. Grahame has also worked on an IG profile comparison tool, which will help us to try to minimize the redundancy and overlap of specifications. And we'll need to actually try to develop the skill of getting in the habit of looking what's there first a little better. But we need the tooling to support that activity before we create something new. Jira balloting and workflow continues to develop, and it slipped several times, but we're looking pretty comfortable about doing the initial ballot for the January cycle, initial test pilot balloting on that. Melva will be talking about the workflow. And Ted will be talking a little later about UTG rollout enhancements. That has, we have, believe it or not, transitioned to UTG. There's still a number of things to do, and particularly what do you co-chairs need to know, and that's what Ted will be talking about. In terms of coming attractions, we got a new page called the Leadership Announcements page. This is still a draft version. We haven't officially rolled it out yet. What the notion is, every time something important happens, we're just going to record it chronologically. This is kind of the analog to what we're already doing on the stand-ups page you can get from the website. And the stand-ups page basically records each new milestone publication that we put out there. This will be recording each major process improvement or tooling improvement. So you've got one place to sort of see what happened when. So look forward to that. We know it's hard. TSC sometimes makes decisions. SGB sometimes makes decisions. Sometimes the board does things that affects the working group. You don't always know about them. And typically, sometimes we usually announce them by email and then we lose the emails. And so we want to basically have a continuous log so you can always go one place to try to find out, hey, I remember something happened at some point. Take us a while to develop the content, but we hope that makes it easier. The new registry, FHIR.org release is due to come out, hopefully by the working group meeting, and this has a number of new search capabilities. More on that in a minute. Our goal is to get all the trackers in JIRA this year. And so that Melva's been working on that, and Melva has been a godsend for all of us in terms of getting a lot of these things that have been on the to-do list done. Has been making tremendous progress. She'll be talking in a few minutes. The STU comment page from the website, we're going to get that into JIRA. I think we're getting very close to that. We want all sort of commentary and responses ultimately to go into the same system in JIRA instead of having all these multiple systems we've had before. And again, we're hopeful, we're confident that we'll have this done well within the year, little by little. But the STU comment page, we expect to have the Q4 this year. We've set a timeline now for retiring what's left in GForge and SVN. We know we've got some work to do with the SVN stuff that's in there, but basically we have the next license renewal coming up next spring. And so we're going to work hard to get off of it by May 2021. So it'll be our standard stack will still be Jira, Confluence, and GitHub. And there are ongoing projects to replace our ballot systems, notably the ballot desktop, but also several peripheral systems and databases, and the Go Members Association management system. So we're still evaluating options and working forward on that, but we hope to make progress on that. Next slide, Mel, please. And so, yeah, I titled this Crossing the Chasm because we're getting enough things out there that we have to focus more on our attention on being able to deliver the value, helping people to use them. And that also involves getting rid of the old things so that you don't have to think about how do I do each thing, but you sort of develop the muscle memory to do it easily, which will be a lot stressful on the working group and on the co-chairs in particular. So I wrote my next newsletter article, which will also be posted on the standard blog. And that's about just reminding people about the focus on essentialism. I think it's only like 100 words or so. It's a very short summary of the key points, but we go over there, take a look at it just to remind ourselves. I mean, that's the board has readopted this notion again, and we really want to make things easier for people. We want to make HL7 a much more inviting organization. And you know, that our efforts are really to try to make substantial progress in the next few months, particularly as we remain virtual. One key part of that easier access to essential information. This is a small shot of the current accelerator homepage. Melva's in the process of translating that. We decided to rename it HL7 Essentials because it's not really just for accelerators. I mean, a lot of the co-chairs looked at it and said, wow, that's pretty useful. And it's really a handy way to review the critical stuff very quickly. And you can drill down and get more and more detail from it. But the idea is to give people a single place to get a pretty handy summary level overview of what's going on. So we're going to rename it. The accelerator page will continue to be around, but they'll have more accelerator focused things. We'll redirect that to this page. And we really do think that's where you should start with, you know, into your refresher training and reminder training as you're getting comfortable things. Things have changed over the last 30 years, believe it or not. And they're changing even more rapidly now. So, but we want to make it easier for people to be able to adapt, because once you get in the swing of these things, you know, you should make it a lot easier. It pains me when people have to struggle. And, you know, that's the biggest goal we want to accomplish. Let's make it easier to do what we need to do. More guidelines and checklists. We've just scratched the surface here, but they help a lot. These little tip sheets, these short webinars. and the checklists to help us just remind ourselves that we didn't, that we crossed all the T's. And this time I mean it, to do a better job of providing regular updates on the Confluence page. I just did the other about 3 weeks ago before I went on vacation, but the last one. But we'll try to do that on more of a monthly or bi-monthly basis, at least, just to keep things moving along. So you have one place, again, to see what's going on. With the announcements page, basically, it's when we actually formally have finished something and turn it over. I issued an RFP recently to try to get some help to say, what else can we do to try to make it easier for people to absorb, understand, and use these essentials? I recognize that in the short run, all this is more of a burden because we're throwing more things at people who don't have the, are busy people who don't have the time to look at it. And so it really is important to sort of, crystallize it into the smallest number of, or least amount of effort. And again, consistent with that is also clearing out the clutter that's making it harder to get to those things and sort of making the transition from old things that we really don't work anymore. And one of the things we want to do is resuming the birds of a feather sessions. We used to do those on Tuesday evenings during the working group meetings. It was always an uncomfortable time because we were late to the beer party, Dave's beer party. Okay, we are going to have a virtual pub this time, but since we're not really meeting in person anyway, and there's no bar we have to get to, there's no reason why we can't have these on a continual basis throughout the year when we have something interesting. And so we'd like to see us having 1 or 2 a month actually in the future. It gives us another opportunity to get everyone involved in the community to take a look at things, what's going on if they want to. And, again, help us to do a better job. It's just another opportunity to interact as a community, which is very difficult these days. The first Birds of a Feather webinar that we've scheduled is going to be end of this month at 4 p.m. And that'll be an overview of the new FHIR registry and the registry enhancements and get a sense of some of the things you can do to be able to look up profiles and IGs and many, many, many different search options, a much more flexible user interface to actually get information out of it. So do try to attend that if you can. Again, we'll record it so that people can always come back and look at it later if they couldn't make it. That's all I had for today. I'd like to turn things over for a few minutes to Grahame, who wanted to say a few words about where we're going with FHIR, the next release of FHIR. Grahame, you have to unmute yourself if I, or.
Yeah, hi everyone. FMG's been discussing and struggling with how to manage release plans for future FHIR releases. We're really trying to find a least worst compromise between the amount of work that we have to do as editors. It's got to be manageable. We don't want to throw too many releases at the market. The market has strong feelings about not getting too many releases. And on the other hand, we have content that's stable and that's market focused, and where that's a perfectly appropriate thing, more mature content. And then we have the new content that's being added where the maturity is low and they want to cycle through releases to bring the maturity up to speed. So the immature content wants faster releases, whereas the mature content doesn't want faster releases. And then whatever we do has to be supported enough that the new releases are meaningful for the purpose of bringing maturity along, so they get enough adoption by the reference platforms and they can be adopted by the relevant target markets. We haven't found an acceptable compromise between those different inputs yet. The discussions are ongoing, happening now. There's actually a specific Julep track for discussing what's the priorities. We have to solve this. We have to have a way to cycle the immature content more quickly than we want to cycle the mature content. It's pretty straightforward. There's some constraints around the fact that the most mature content is normative, and we have to observe those constraints. And we don't want to create an unrealistic amount of work for committees, and also error-prone things like maintaining 2 copies of everything that are not, you can't just copy and paste between one and the other because they're slightly different, the frameworks are different. we're still discussing how exactly that's all going to be resolved. If you're interested in that subject, join us on the Julep channel. I'm going to announce that Julep channel today on the announcements on chat.fhir.org if you're interested in joining. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you, Grahame. And next, Melva.
Hi, everybody. So I wanted to give us some updates on some of the process improvement tasks that we've been working on. So we've talked about the project proposal process. It's been in place since April. And I would like to thank all the work groups that have been using the new process. I think that many of them have been finding that it's useful, particularly if they're trying to find a project sponsor. So effective, I won't say effective immediately like Dave got into trouble for, but effective as of November 1st, 2020, the project proposal will be mandatory for all new projects. Those are if you are developing a release 1 specification. So as Austin said, if you are developing a R2 of CDA or something else, you don't have to do a project proposal for those. So anything updating a previously balloted or published specifications, there's no need to do the project proposal, nor is there a need to do it for reaffirmations, withdrawal, or with recirculation ballots. But anything else, we want a project proposal done before you do the project scope statement. Just a reminder, the proposal is a 2-week cycle. Once it's in, it's out for consensus review. It isn't an approval process, it is acceptance, and it's 2 weeks cycle. So there is information, I put the link, and I'm sure we'll be sharing the slide deck after the session. So next slide, please. So this new project proposal really was the first stage of the rework we've been doing to the project scope statement to add it, work to it, and hopefully make it less burdensome and faster process overall. So we've done a couple of pilots with the project scope statements using Confluence. We are now moving to a JIRA-based solution with the workflow built in. So when we roll this out, and hopefully it will be rolled out in the September-October timeframe, it will change the project proposal or project scope statements to consensus review as opposed to the approval processes that are needed. And everybody knows how hard it is to get a project scope statement through all of the approvals. And I think somebody counted it up and there was like 6 or 7 approval steps. So the only approvals in the new process will be from the sponsoring work group, which starts the process, and at the TSC, which ends the process. And all others is a consensus review and will be done in parallel and not sequentially. So it'll go out for consensus review. It will be open for a month. It will be announced. Co-sponsors and other groups that need to review it, like management groups, will get subtasks created in JIRA, and we'll go out and review it and put their comments in. And at the end of that 1 month, the TSC will do the final review of it and approval. So really the goal is to make it faster and less of a burden for work groups to go through and others to go through.
Melva, will the person that is the driver of the PSS get notifications as it proceeds through the different?
Yes.
approvals?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the notifications will be built in to this. There will also be notifications out to the work groups and others, as well as to Zulep when a new project scope statement comes out. But yes, there will be notifications in there for sure. Next slide. Okay, so like I said, we are moving to JIRA instead of Confluence. And so as you get used to JIRA with the specification feedbacks, this will be another use of JIRA. As I said, we hope that we'll pilot it in the September timeframe and roll out in October, November. So if you are interested in participating in the pilot, probably we won't be doing more in the current pilot, but in the next pilot, where we start to use JIRA, you can contact Anne, which is the TSC PM email address that's there. And there is more information on Confluence about this. All the notes and some of the work that's being done is in Confluence. So I'm really looking forward to this. I know this is such a burdensome process to get through a project's approval. So next slide. So the other thing that actually has been, I'm going to say has been rolled out, because Josh messaged me just before the start of the webinar and said to me, do you want me to make the storage live? And I said yes. So document storage is hugely problematic at HL7. Where work groups and committees store their documents is inconsistent. Some do it in Confluence, some do it in the document repository. We have documents in GForge as well as SVN, and I'm sure lots on personal Dropboxes and other places. So what we've done is we have added a file storage S3 connector, which is to a cloud-based, I believe it's an Amazon cloud-based repository, to each of the work groups and governance group Confluence spaces. So you will start to see S3 storage as a shortcut in your Confluence spaces. So I said it would show up over the next week. It'll probably show up today or tomorrow, if not, if it hasn't already shown up. Next slide. So these are really easy to use, and they look just like a Windows folder. I've forgotten what it's used. It's Finder in Mac, whatever it was called in Windows. But it's really easy to use, just like you would do on your PC. You can create folders and subfolders. I would really encourage you to think about the structure you want to use before you get started. We've created a how-to document, and the link is there on Confluence. At the moment, we set it up with the default permissions mirroring Confluence. And so the co-chairs will be able to view, create, rename, and delete the folders and subfolders and the material in it. JIRA users, which is everybody with a JIRA account, will be able to view and create. So that means they can add material in, documents in. And then anybody else can just view. So that's what it's set up, which is what mirrors the Confluence permissions for the work groups. If you do have questions, you can email the webmaster, and the email is there. And as questions come up over the next little bit, we will be posting some FAQs. But we're really hoping that work groups can make use of this and move away from storing documents all over the place. And ideally, all of the documents will be stored in this S3 file storage, as opposed to storing them in Confluence and then linking to them. You can certainly link from this file storage into your Confluence pages. So the next slide. Oh, let me just finish this one. I will, if you just give me this one. This is the last slide, and then I'll take a question. So what we're also encouraging you to do is review and clean up the documents that you have in SVN, GForge, and the document repository. So as Wayne mentioned, we will be retiring GForge next spring. So we need work groups to clean up what is there and move over. We will be archiving content from those areas, but if you can clean it up and get rid of some of them, I know there's duplicate copies and probably some material there that you probably just don't need anymore. And so move the content over that is still in use, but don't arbitrarily just move over all of the content, because we will be looking at the file storage and making sure that we suddenly don't have everything just moved from one to the other. Sorry, and there was a question, I think.
Yeah, this is Mark Janchevsky, EHR Workgroup. Just a quick question on file storage. So in the past, we had stored, we, as co-chairs, we had kept our meeting minutes and agendas stored on a Dropbox, and then we've uploaded them. We've uploaded a link to Confluence. So
we don't, Mark, you should be using Confluence itself for your minutes. Please don't be using Word documents and storing them. You need to be using Confluence pages for your minutes.
Okay, because we've been basically saying, okay, well, once we've uploaded the link, we thought the file itself was being uploaded to the cloud. From my understanding, you do have a cloud in which you're storing documents.
So, Mark and Melva, I think we need to get Ted in first. We can stay a little
Yeah.
after for questions and put them
Okay.
in chat. I'm trying to address them, but let's try to
Sure.
get Ted
Okay.
to finish with the last session if we could, Mark. And we'll,
Yeah, I think that was my last
yeah.
slide. So
Let's take over to some.
Okay.
I'll go to the next slide. Let's give Ted a few
Yep.
minutes to give us the UTG update.
Okay, I'll be very brief here. Time is short. Those of you who know me know what a challenge that is for me. UTG, which we've spoken about in the co-chair meetings for a number of years now, has been in initial use for several months, and we're doing an ongoing rollout as we have more people using it, and we encounter things that work differently than we originally thought. We're fixing them and moving ahead. We plan to do the full go live as soon as possible. Many folks are already using the process and using the system. The content and the process, everything is fully documented. Everything is on Confluence. Everything is available to everyone, including kind of internal notes and project managements and to-do lists. I mean, everything is there. We have finished the first of the 4 educational webinars that are planned. The first one for the general public and HIT community that may be users and access HL7 standards and terminology. And the second one specifically for HL7 members and how members are involved in the process and the system. Those are available. Links are in the slides. Links are they're on the HL7 YouTube channel. They're on Education on Demand. They're in a number of different places. Should not be difficult to find these educational webinars. They're not terribly long. They're pretty clear. I personally think they're excellent. Jess Boda, who's our project manager for the UTG project, presented on them, and she did a great job. The third tutorial for reviewers and voters in the consensus review process is in the process of being finalized, and we will record it very soon and release that and also upload it. And the last tutorial for the submitters is currently, we're putting ideas together and putting the content together for that. Next slide. So there are 3 major pieces to bring this down to its kind of simplest essentials. Again, you've got the content, which is available at terminology.hl7.org. There's a landing page. That screenshot is of the current build. The initial release was really a trial balloon release, the 1.0.0 release, and we have identified a whole host of issues with it, which is another reason why we're actively working as quickly as we can to get release 2 finished and ready to go. So when you're looking at content for the HL7 vocabulary, please look at the the continuous integration current build. Right now it is at 1.0.28. And again, a link to that is on the landing page at terminology.hl7.org. The governance of the vocabulary, the management of the changes, the publication of it, all of this kind of thing are done through the JIRA project. Those of you that have been using the JIRA system are aware that there are dozens of projects in JIRA. The UTG project is the UP project. You can find that on the drop-down menu when you click on projects or you view all projects. And that's the one where all of the change proposals that are in work and the ones that we've completed. We've got half a dozen that are currently out for consensus review, 3 or 4 that have already been implemented and released into the current build. We have both consensus-driven change requests and technical corrections. We're really trying to flesh out every corner case of the workflow before we go completely live with it. And as I mentioned earlier, everything is documented on Confluence. There is a link right on the HL7 main, the vocabulary main Confluence page that says vocabulary maintenance at HL7. And that has everything you need to know to use UTG, to access it, to sign up to be a reviewer voter, to see how to submit proposals, to get involved in the process, everything. And then everything else that's not on the maintenance page is on the UTG project page. So everything is right there. It's in Jira, Confluence, and the basic content web pages at terminology.hl7.org. Next slide. So virtually all of the HL7 vocabulary has now been imported to UTG. We're also maintaining it all in UTG, with the exception of some of the stuff in FHIR core and some of the scratch stuff that's done in Connectathon preparation and working through Connectathons, et cetera. And then, of course, CCDA is still under discussion of exactly how we're going to integrate that. But everything else is in UTG. All the changes must follow the UTG process. The only changes that get committed directly to the source of truth, and the source of truth is in GitHub, are technical corrections for errors that happened on import or errors triggered by tooling bugs, process workflow bugs, and we're fixing things that go awry. But all of the content changes must come through the UTG consensus process. Those web pages that you see that are accessible off of terminology.hl7.org are generated by the IG publisher. And shout out to Grahame. Thank you for all of the support and help in the enhancements to the publisher to support the needs of UTG. And these things are ongoing. I see you just made a change in the last 24 hours that I have to get on top of. Because this is now a consensus process, and we're doing this for all of vocabulary maintenance, it requires participation. If you don't have people participate, you can't declare consensus. Now, if 3 people out of 300 participate, you can't have a consensus. So every work group touching vocabulary, meaning that you're building models or working on IGs or working on things that, that modify, access, use terminology, you must appoint at least 1 reviewer voter for your work group. This mirrors what we did in harmonization before, where every work group has to take a look at what's coming through the change process and say, oh, it affects us or it doesn't. The idea is every work group needs someone who does this, who can comment, who can review, who can vote on proposals. We're looking for every work group to have that. Every change proposal should be voted on or at least commented on, every single one. And we have deliberately chosen to remove the option to abstain, right? You either comment or you say, yes, it's good to go because it won't affect us either way and we're not going to hold it up. Or you say, no, there's a problem and it has to be addressed. And so every change proposal should be voted on by everybody. And eventually, as Austin alluded to right in the beginning, we're going to have some metrics focused on this. Right now, it's at the mode of just me giving exhortation for everyone to please participate. We have assigned roles for the voters and things. There's a link on the Confluence page, vocabulary maintenance at HL7, so that you can get set up with permissions to be able to cast votes on proposals. There are additional individuals who exercise oversight for certain groups of vocabulary. So, for instance, Grahame is in one of those oversight groups to exercise oversight of all of the FHIR vocabulary. And so people, the layout of those groups and who participates as an oversight voter and how strong their voice is something that is reviewed by the SGB, and it is specifically appointed by the TSC chair and the CTO. So again, be aware that those are there. If you think someone needs to be in there as an oversight group, contact the SGB or anyone on the UTG, and we will see that you can be added to that for oversight. But again, it is a TSC chair and CTO decision of who in the organization exercises weighty oversight on the vocabulary maintenance process. But bear in mind that with the authority comes responsibility. If you are in an oversight group, you're part of the quorum requirement for every change proposal to move forward. And change proposals will not move forward unless the people who have volunteered to be and accepted the responsibility for exercising voting oversight actually weigh in on the proposal. So we're trying to move ahead to kind of a world where there's responsibility attached to every component of authority. So people can't just say, oh, sure, I'll be part of that, and then they become part of the woodwork. So it's an active process, requires participation. Please get involved. Anyone in the UTG team is happy to go over things with you if need be. We've been working really, really hard to make this as clear as possible from a communications point of view, but of course, it's never perfect. So I think that is my last slide.
I think that's it.
So.
We're a little over time, but as I said earlier, some of us will stay here. No, thank you, Ted.
And I'll stay here if people have questions.
Yeah. And we do heartily encourage looking at those webinars. They're short, they're well written, well presented, and that should give you a pretty good idea. But lots of stuff changing right now. We recognize that. We're going to try to aim for stability. Any other questions? I saw there was one from you, Melva, about UTG.
Yeah, I was wondering, how do we know that there's something out there? If work groups are expected to vote on something, how do we know that there's something out there to vote on? I know we've got emails.
As part of the review setup process, you opt in to getting notification of change proposals, of new ones of particular types or particular classes of vocabulary. And there is an extensive set of Confluence pages that Josh worked on putting together with us for you to be able to tune up your notifications for when there are changes, when there are votes, when it gets approved, if it gets rejected, all of these kinds of things so you can get full notification.
Okay.
We did deliberately pick an opt-in system rather than an opt-out system because everyone's getting blizzarded with emails from Jira and Confluence.
I think that the issue will be if we are allowed to opt in, then metrics are a problem. So we need to do a better job of letting the work group co-chairs know that there's a responsibility and that they shouldn't opt out because they're going to be dinged on work group health if they do.
Correct. That's why we haven't gone live with metrics, and we're kind of approaching this kind of slowly with repeated presentations because we're still working through exactly how all of this works in an organization such as this.
So a question, can you opt in as a work group so all the co-chairs get it, or is it as an individual?
So this is based on your Jira login, which is as an individual. And we looked at having work groups, and it's quite the administrative challenge for having that, because Jira is the HL7 Jira environment is set up with named individual Jira login users. That's why we're recommending every work group has at least one person, preferably everyone, maybe all the co-chairs, that signs up as this. And again, the quorum and the voting requirement is any one of the people in the work group can vote. Not everybody has to.
So this should be very similar to what the vocab facilitator role was previously.
Exactly.
They're not always used, but that's the idea. Not everyone's going to want to participate in UTG, but every work group should have at least one person who's paying attention.
And for evaluating work group health in the future, we may actually ask you to identify who those individuals are representing the work group, so we can.
Well, we'll have them. Ted will have them logged in with the role. I think we should be able to do that.
Have one with the role, and I'll have an association.
So we'll find who the exceptions are.
Yeah,
we're still working
on
all the online documentation so that we can measure this appropriately.
I'd suggest some quick and easy documentation of just what we need to know, so we know we have to go out there, and not a big long update on UTG, because I just want to know that I actually have to go out and do something.
Yep. I'll add that to our vocabulary maintenance at HL7 page. I just add a sentence in there about what work groups are required, are being asked to do.
See, Hugh is asking, do work groups still need a vocab facilitator?
This role actually is what is kind of replacing the vocab facilitator role. We don't have a name for it, and we haven't figured out whether it's a role with any one of a number of named individuals in that role, rather than you are identified as the facilitator for the work group. We're still trying to figure out how all of those things are related together, because things are being changed significantly. But it functions exactly the same as the old vocabulary facilitator role.
So Floyd is asking, can one individual be the facilitator for more than one work group?
Yes.
We believe so. And just as in the old days in harmonization, you can represent multiple work groups, but you only vote on one. In this way, you cast a vote as an individual on a particular change proposal. You don't get to cast multiple votes for each one of the work groups that you're representing, in the same way that the old harmonization process was set up.
Okay, so Virginia is saying, why don't we just call it the vocab facilitator and not change it?
Well, because we've separated a couple of roles that were conflated in the past. We've made it explicit. There's a difference between monitoring, reviewing, commenting on, and voting on proposals versus submitting proposals. And so in the old system, the vocabulary facilitators were the only people permitted to submit change proposals. They were expected to vote in the harmonization meeting, but others who were not facilitators also voted in the harmonization meeting. So right now we have an explicit separation between the submitter role to submit change proposals and to do the technical work of putting one together and preparing it for consensus review, and then actually reviewing it and voting on it, which requires nothing more than sign up to be one, and you have a browser. And so those are now explicitly separated rather than kind of being mishmashed together as they were in the old process.
Okay, so I think we're pretty much over time at this point.
Yeah.
I just wanted to close out by saying that we'll be back again after the working group meeting, a few weeks after that, with lessons learned, more information, and have at least one or two more before the end of this year. So thank you all of you for joining. We had pretty good turnout as in the 80s, which is, we really appreciate your commitment, and keep those cards and letters coming in. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.